He couldn't sit a horse to save his life, the man in the silver coat said, loud enough that the whole row of stable boys heard it, and he said it while looking straight at Thomas Wren, who stood his post by the carousel rail without so much as a blink. I was 3 feet to Wren's left, holding my own square the way we are taught to hold it, and I felt my jaw tighten under the chin strap. I have served beside that man for 9 years. I have never once heard him answer a thing like that, and I did not expect him to answer it then. But I will tell you what I knew that the man in the silver coat did not, and what the whole bright, perfumed crowd at the midsummer carousel did not, and what I had only learned myself by accident 2 winters before. There was not a man on that field, in a saddle or out of it, who knew horses the way Thomas Wren knew them. They just could not see it. He was a statue in a red tunic to them, a toy soldier posted to make their summer party look grand, furniture in a bearskin. The man in the silver coat was Lord Verrill of the House of Caston, and he was the kind of rider who had never once in his life wondered whether he was good. 3 ribbons that morning already, a horse worth more than the cottages it would never live in. He had an audience of the same cut as himself, a half-dozen young lords and a pair of ladies in riding habits cut too fine to risk on a real horse, and they laughed when he laughed, the way that kind always does. "Look at him," Verrill went on, walking his bay gelding slowly along our rail so his friends could enjoy the view. "Stood there like a fence post. I wager he's never had a beast move under him in his life. They drill them to stand, you know. That's the whole trick of it, standing. A donkey could be trained to it." He leaned down from the saddle close to Wren's face the way the rude ones always test us. "Could you sit my castellan here, soldier?" "No, I didn't think so. Stick to your fence." Wren looked at the middle distance, past Verrill's ear, the way we are taught. White gloves still, rifle still, bearskin still. He gave the man nothing, which is the correct thing, and which is also, I have noticed across 9 years, the single thing that enrages that kind of man more than any insult he could be handed back. I will tell you about the field, because you need to see it to understand what came after. The midsummer carousel was the great horse day of the Aldermere estate, the summer seat of our fictional household, a long green ground ringed by white rail and gilded boxes, the royal box at the head of it under a striped awning. The cream of the riding houses came to it every year to show their best blood and their best hands. There were jumps and dressage figures and the carousel itself, the old mounted drill where a dozen riders weave their horses in patterns to music. It was beautiful. I will not pretend it was not beautiful. The light came down green and gold through the elms, and the horses shone like they had been polished. And the people who owned those horses were, a great many of them, exactly as Lord Verrill was. They had been born into the saddle and had decided, somewhere along the way, that this made them a higher sort of creature than the men who mucked the stalls and the men who stood the rail. They were not all so, but Verrill's set was, and Verrill's set was loud, and on that day they had chosen Thomas Wren as their amusement. "Sergeant," one of the young lords called towards Sergeant Marshal Hale, who oversaw our detail, "is it true your men can't ride?" "Verrill says it's true." Hale, who is a good man and a sober one, said only, "My men can do what they're posted to do, my lord," and left it there, which was correct, and which also told them nothing. "Posted to stand," Verrill said, and his friends laughed again. I felt the heat climb my neck. Wren felt nothing that showed. That is the part people never understand about us, that the not showing is not the absence of feeling. It is the discipline laid over the feeling like a hand laid flat over a struck bell, so the note does not ring out into the room. The bell is struck. You simply do not let it sound. A stable boy near the rail, a thin lad of maybe 14, holding a water bucket, looked up at Wren with something close to anguish on his face, because he had clearly heard everything, and he opened his mouth as if to say something in the guard's defense. Wren's eyes flicked down to him for half a second, just half a second, and the smallest movement of his head, no, and the boy closed his mouth. I marked that. I did not understand it yet, but I marked it, because in 9 years I had learned that when Tomas Wren took notice of a thing, it was worth taking notice of. What I did not know, standing there with my own anger banked behind my own still face, was that the boy with the bucket knew exactly who Wren was. And that within the hour, every man and woman on that bright green field was going to learn it too. The thing about a day like that is that it runs on a schedule, and the schedule does not care what is said at the rail. The horn sounded for the next event. Verrill straightened in his saddle, well pleased with himself, and rode off to collect, no doubt, another ribbon. The crowd in the boxes rustled and resettled. The band took up a bright air, and Tomas Wren stood as square as if nothing in the world had happened, because as far as the world could see, nothing had. I want to be honest about my own state of mind, because the man telling you this was not a saint that afternoon. I wanted Verrill to be thrown. I am not proud of it. I stood there in the green and gold light wanting, with a small mean corner of my heart, for that beautiful bay gelding to dump that beautiful man in the dirt in front of all his friends. I told myself it would be justice. It was not justice that came. It was something a great deal stranger and a great deal larger, and by the end of it I was ashamed I had ever wished for the small thing when the large thing was waiting. It began at the far end of the field, near the practice paddocks, with a sound I felt before I understood, a flat, hard crack of splintering wood, and then a scream that no horse makes unless something has gone very wrong. Heads turned all down the line of boxes. Mine did not, because mine is not permitted to, but I cut my eyes hard to the right, and I saw at the same moment the crowd did. A horse had got loose, not a fat show pony, a great iron-gray stallion, near 17 hands of him, the prize of some northern house, and he had gone through the rail of the practice paddock as though it were made of straw. There was a groom on the ground behind him, not moving the way a man moves when he chooses to. There was a lead rope dragging from the head collar, whipping in the grass. And there was a quarter-mile of open green field, full of mounted riders and full of people on foot, between that animal and the crowded boxes at the head of the ground. He bolted straight into all of it. I have seen frightened men in my years of service, and I have seen frightened crowds, and I will tell you there is nothing like the particular terror of a half-ton animal running blind. He was not charging anyone. That was the worst of it. He was simply running, the whites of his eyes showing all the way round, past all sense, past all training, a wall of muscle and iron shoes with no mind left behind it to be reasoned with, and everything in his path had to get out of it or be broken. The riders scattered. The fine young lords who had laughed at the rail an hour before hauled their mounts aside and got clear, and I do not blame them for it, because their horses were screaming too, and a man can only ride what he is sitting on. A lady was nearly ridden down by her own bolting mare, and was saved by a groom who flung himself at the bridle. The bright air the band had been playing came apart into shouts. Lord Verrill, and I give him this much, turned his bay gelding to face the gray and tried to head him. He was a good rider. I told you that, and it was true. He put his horse across the loose stallion's line with his arm out and his voice raised, the practiced move of a man who had headed plenty of fractious animals in plenty of show rings. The gray went through him like he was not there. Verrill's gelding spun and reared and nearly went over backward, and Verrill kept his seat. He truly was a good rider. But his face when he came down out of that rear was the face of a man who has just understood that the thing in front of him does not know the rules he has lived his whole life inside. There are no rules in a bolting horse. There is only the running, and the wall it makes, and the question of who is in the way. And the people in the way now were the children. I had not let myself fix on it until that moment, but at the foot of the royal box, where the lawn ran down to the rail, there was a little cluster of small ones. The household's youngest guests, brought to see the pretty horses, penned behind a low decorative fence that would stop a gray stallion the way a ribbon stops a river. Their minders were already snatching at them, already running, but you cannot move a knot of frightened small ones quickly, and the gray had turned, some trick of the noise, some flag of color. The gray had turned and was running now, all that iron, straight down the green toward them. 40 yards, 30. I want to be exact about what happened, because afterward a great many people told a great many versions, and most of them were wrong, and the wrong ones all made it grander and faster and more like a thing out of a song than it was. It was not like a song. It was very quiet at the center of it and very fast at the edges, and it began with Thomas Wren handing me his rifle. He did not run. That is the first thing the songs get wrong. A running man to a panicked horse is one more terror in a world that has become all terror. Wren stepped off his square, and I felt the wrongness of that in my own bones, because we do not step off our squares. It is the first law written into us. He stepped off, and he set his rifle into my hands without looking at me, and he walked out onto the green directly into the path of the gray. Not fast, not slow. He walked the way a man walks across his own kitchen in the dark, certain of every board, and he had pulled the bearskin from his head and dropped it in the grass behind him so that what the horse would see was a man, only a man, with his arms held a little out from his sides and low. "Wren," Hale shouted. I had never heard the sergeant marshal shout. "Ren, get back." He did not get back. He kept walking, and as he walked he began to make a sound. I cannot write it properly. It was not a word and it was not a whistle. It was low and even, and it came up from somewhere under the chest. A long, unbroken tone that rose and fell in a way I felt more than heard. And it did not change when the stallion's hooves came thundering closer. And it did not change when a woman in the boxes screamed. And it did not change when every nerve I owned was telling me the man was about to be trampled into the green in front of the whole bright cream of the kingdom's riding houses. 20 yards, the gray saw him. And here is the thing I will swear to until I am too old to swear to anything. The horse did not stop because Wren was brave. Brave men get trampled. The horse changed because of something Wren was doing that none of the rest of us could do, and that I did not even have the eyes to see while it was happening. A thing in the way he stood, the way he held his shoulders soft and his hands low and turned slightly away, the angle of his body that said to a creature with no words and no reason left to it, "I am not the thing you are running from. I am the place the running can stop." The gray broke stride. You could see it hit him. The great head came up. The ears, which had been pinned flat, came forward a half-inch. He swerved, not away from Wren but around him, a tight curving arc, and Wren turned with him, always keeping that soft-shouldered angle, always that low, even tone coming up out of his chest. And where I expected the horse to blow past and keep running for the children, the horse instead came round Wren in a circle, as though Wren were a post he was tied to by a rope none of us could see. Once around, the tone never broke. Twice around, the circle smaller, the gray's gallop falling to a hard canter, and the canter falling to a high blowing trot, foam at his mouth, the whites of his eyes still showing but his ears coming forward more each pass, fixing on the man at the center who would not stop making that sound. I learned afterward that there were trained men on that field who knew, the instant Wren stepped off his square, exactly what he was doing, that the old groom who later took the rope had grabbed the arm of the man beside him and breathed, "Don't anyone move, don't anyone shout, he's working him." But I was not one of them. I did not have the eyes. To me, it looked like a guardsman about to die, and I stood there with his rifle cold in my two hands and my own training screaming at me to do something, anything. And the hardest thing I have ever done in a red tunic was to obey the deeper rule that said the man knew his business, and the worst thing I could do was add one more frightened, shouting creature to a field that already had one too many. So I held the way he was holding. And I watched. The minders had the small ones away behind the box by then. I did not see them go. I only know they were gone when I dared look, because every particle of me was fixed on the grass at the center of the field, where Thomas Wren was turning slow inside the orbit of a runaway stallion, as if the two of them were the only living things on the earth. He let the rope come to him. That was the only quick thing he did in the whole of it, and it was so smooth I nearly missed it. On one of the passes, the dragging lead rope swung near his hand and he had it, not snatching, just closing his fingers, and now there was a line between them, slack, never pulled tight, because he never once hauled on that horse. I have watched grooms and trainers fight a frightened animal with main strength, both of them sweating and furious, and I had always thought that was what handling a horse was. Ren did not fight him at all. He gave the rope and took it and gave it, and he turned, and he kept making that sound, and slowly, the circle stopped being a circle and became a smaller thing, and then the smaller thing became the gray standing still. Not beaten still. I want that understood. Beaten still is a horse with its head down and its spirit broken, and I have seen it, and it is an ugly thing. This was not that. The gray stood with his head high and his sides heaving like a bellows and his great dark eye rolling, but standing, blowing, every few seconds a long shudder running down his flank. And Ren had moved up alongside the heaving shoulder, still turned a little away, still low, and he laid one white glove flat on the wet gray neck. The field was so quiet I heard the glove touch the hide. He stood like that a long moment, his hand on the neck, that low tone gone now to almost nothing, just breath, and the great horse dropped his head by degrees until the iron-gray muzzle hung level with Ren's chest, and then lower, and then the stallion did a thing that made a woman somewhere in the boxes begin to weep. He leaned the broad bone of his head against the man's shoulder and stood there, trembling, and let himself be held. Tomas Ren reached up with his free hand and rubbed the place between the animal's eyes with 2 fingers, the way you would soothe a child who has woken from a nightmare and cannot yet be told that the dream is over. And he murmured something I was too far to hear, and the stallion blew out one long breath and was still. A man in stable clothes came running up at last with a proper head collar, slowing himself the last 20 feet because he had sense enough to see what he was walking into. He took the lead from Ren's hand with both of his own, and he was shaking. "Sir," he said, "Sir, and could not finish it." Ren said quietly the first words I had heard him speak in 2 hours, "Walk him long, don't put him up wet. He'll dream tonight, let the groom stay by him." And then, because the man was still staring at him as though he had seen a saint walk out of a wall, Ren added in the same low voice, "He's a good horse. He was only frightened. They're never anything but frightened when they go like that." He bent and picked his bearskin up out of the grass. He shook it once. He set it on his head and he squared it, and he walked back across the green to the place where his square was marked, and he took his rifle back out of my hands, and he stood his post. That was when I looked at the boxes, and that is when the second thing happened, the thing that turned a story about a brave guardsman into a story about who that guardsman was. Because among all the faces hanging over the gilded rail, white and shaken and amazed, there was one old face that was not amazed at all. It was a thing other than amazement. The old man, silver-headed, very straight in the dark coat of a senior horseman, a master of the kind these houses keep and revere, was staring at Tomas Ren with his mouth a little open and the slow dawning look of a man recognizing a ghost. And then he said a name, not Ren, another name. He said it loud into the hush in a voice that cracked, and every old horseman in those boxes turned white. "That's the quietman," the old master said. "That's Master Aldous Ren of the remount. I'd know that circle if I were blind." I did not understand it. I am a guardsman, not a horseman, and the name meant nothing to me then. But I watched it move through the boxes like a wind through wheat, master to master, head to head, and I watched the faces change as it went, and I knew it meant a great deal to them, and I have spent the time since learning why. There was a place, that the great riding houses do not talk about much in front of outsiders because it humbles them, and they would rather you thought their gifts came down to them in their blood. It was the remount. The old Royal Cavalry School, the deep stone yards where the house holds difficult horses, the brilliant dangerous ones the show rings could not use, were sent to be made sound. The horses that had hurt men. The horses that had been ruined by bad hands and written off. And the man who ran the gentling yard there, for the better part of 20 years, the man every serious horseman in the kingdom had either studied under or wished he had, was a master called the Quietman, who took the horses no one else could touch and gave them back whole. Not by breaking them. That was his fame and his quarrel with the times, that he would not break a horse. He gentled them. He taught a generation of young horsemen the thing they were too proud, most of them, to admit they had been taught, that you cannot beat fear out of a living thing, you can only give it somewhere to put the fear down. Half the masters in those gilded boxes had stood in the Quietman's yard as boys and been shown how to hold their shoulders soft and their hands low. Lord Verrill's own grandfather, I would learn, had sent Verrill's first pony to the remount to be made safe enough for a child to ride. And then the remount was closed. Reorganized the way old good things are, by men with ledgers who decided the cavalry school cost more than it was worth, and the famous gentling yard was shut, and the Quietman, who had no rank, no title, no land, only the most valuable pair of hands in the kingdom, was, in the cold arithmetic of it, out of a place. The houses that had revered him did not, when it came to it, make him a place. A man who will not flatter and will not break horses is an inconvenient sort of master to keep around. They let him go. What I had never known in 9 years of standing beside him was where he had gone. He had taken the one post a quiet, disciplined, masterless man could take with his head up. He had put on the red tunic and the bearskin and become furniture. He had let them call him a toy soldier and a fence post and a donkey trained to stand, and he had stood, and he had said nothing, because the discipline of the guard and the discipline of the gentling yard, I understand now, are the same discipline wearing 2 coats. You hold the bell so it does not ring. You do not fight the fear in front of you, you give it somewhere to go. You become the still place at the center, and you let the running stop. The old master came down out of the boxes. He was not a young man, and he came slowly, but he crossed the whole green field on his own legs, past the scattered riders and the trembling grooms and the wreckage of the rail, and he came to a stop in front of Thomas Wren's square, and he took off his own hat. He did not ask whether it was true. He knew it was true. He had seen the circle. "Master Wren," he said, "forgive an old fool for not knowing you at once. The coat threw me." He looked at the red tunic, the bearskin, the rifle, the whole immaculate ceremonial weight of it, and something moved in his old face that might have been grief. "We did not look after you. I'll say it where they can hear it. We owed you a yard and a roof for the rest of your days, and we let the ledger men turn you out, and you went and stood a gate. Forgive us." Wren looked at the middle distance the way he is trained to. But he answered the old man low, and I was close enough this time to hear it. "There's nothing to forgive, Master Holloway. A man stands where he can stand with his honor. I've had a good post and good comrades and a roof, and on most days nobody troubles me." The ghost of something crossed his still face. "I've no quarrel with where I stand." "They mocked you," Holloway said. "This morning I heard it. Half the field heard it." "They didn't know better," Wren said. "Most men, when they mock a still man, are only frightened of something. They're never anything but frightened when they go like that." It was the same thing he had said of the horse. I do not think he made the echo on purpose. I think it is simply how the man sees the world. It cost me nothing to let it pass. And by now the others had come, Verrill among them. He had got down off his bay. He came across the grass on foot with the rest of the young lords trailing behind him, and the cocksure tilt was gone out of him, and I watched him try, the whole walk over, to find some way to be the man he had been an hour before, and fail to find it. There is no being that man again. Once a thing like this has happened in front of everyone you were performing for. He stopped a few feet from Wren's square, and his fine riding boots were dark with dew, and he opened his mouth, and what came out was not what he had meant to say. "I rode your school," he said. "When I was 9, I didn't know it was you. My grandfather sent my pony to the remount, and they sent her back gentle, and I rode her 10 years, and I never knew the man who did it." He swallowed. I said you couldn't sit a horse. Ren said nothing. He looked at the middle distance. He was on his post, and on his post he does not chat with lords, and he was not going to make this easy for Verrill by pretending the morning had not happened. That, too, was discipline, the discipline of not rushing in to spare a man the weight of his own words. He let Verrill hold it. I want to say I'm sorry, Verrill said, and to his credit he said it plainly without the curl in it, but a sorry seems a small coin for it. You walked out in front of that horse, toward the children. The rest of us turned our horses away and you walked at it. His voice did something then that I had not expected from him. Why? You owed this field nothing. We'd spent the morning laughing at you. And Tomas Ren broke his stare from the middle distance. Only for a moment, only because the question was an honest one and honest questions are owed an honest look. And he said, the children were in the way, that's all the why there is. It was not grand. He did not make a speech, but I watched it land on Lord Verrill of the House of Caston like a slow weight, because Verrill had spent his whole life believing that the worth of a man was a thing you could see from the saddle, the cut of him, the blood in him, the ribbons on his breast, and he had just been shown, in front of every person whose opinion he had ever cared about, that the most valuable man on the field had been the one he could not be bothered to see. Take your school back, Verrill said suddenly, and there was something almost desperate in it now, the man scrambling to make it right with the only currency he understood. I'll fund it. My house will fund it. The yard, the stone, all of it. Come back to the remount, Master Ren, and I'll see you never want for. No, Ren said. It was gentle, but it was a wall, and it was the same wall I had heard in his voice 1,000 times on the gate, the wall that does not move. I thank you, he said, and I'll believe the offer was real, because today made an honest man of you, my lord, and that's worth more than the school. But I gave the houses my hands for 20 years, and the houses gave me a ledger. I'll not stand in a yard again waiting on the goodwill of men who measure a thing by what it costs them. He let that sit. Then quieter, almost kind. If you want to do honor to the old yard, don't buy it back from me. Run it again properly with a master who's kept the way of it and send the ruined horses there instead of the knacker. There are men who learned under me who'd give their lives to teach in that yard. Pay them. Keep it open. That's the honor, not me back in it. The way of it kept alive. Old Master Holloway, standing by, put his hat back on his head and said, in a voice gone thick, I'll see it done. On my name, Master Ren. The yard reopens and it keeps your way, and we put your name over the door whether you like it or not. Leave my name off it, Ren said. Put the way over the door, the way's the thing. I was only ever a man who kept it. The young lords who had laughed with Verrill at the rail that morning stood behind him now in a loose, shamed half-circle, and not one of them could meet the guard's eye. I watched one of them, a fair-haired youth who had laughed the loudest, who had called across to Hale to ask whether the soldier could ride, take off his own hat, and hold it against his chest the way you do at a graveside, without seeming to know he had done it. They had come onto that field cert. They were the finest horsemen in the kingdom, and they were leaving it having watched a man none of them could have matched walk unarmed into a thing that had made all their skill worthless in a heartbeat. A ribbon is a small thing to carry off a field where you have seen that. I think every one of them knew it. Verrill certainly knew it. He never wore his that day, and I am told he gave it to the groom who had been knocked down by the gray, which was, in its way, the first wholly decent thing I ever saw the man do. And the old groom who had taken the lead rope from Ren's hand, the one who had been shaking, went round the boxes afterward, I learned, telling anyone who would listen the one detail none of them had been close enough to see, that when the quietman had laid his glove on the gray's neck, he had not been gripping. He had not been holding the horse at all. The rope had hung slack the whole time. The great frightened animal had stood because it wanted to stand, in the one place on that whole shrieking field where the fear could finally be put down. He never pulled, the old groom kept saying, turning his cap in his hands. Not once. He never pulled. I have thought about that a great deal since. The way's the thing. I was only ever a man who kept it. I think it is the truest thing I have ever heard a man say about his own life, and I think it is why he could stand 9 years of being called a fence post without it touching him. He did not need the field to know what he was. He knew what he was. The knowing was inside, where the bell is held, and no amount of laughter from the rail could get at it. The horns were sounding again. A day like that runs on a schedule, and the schedule does not stop for a miracle any more than it stopped for an insult. The grooms were leading the gray away at a long, slow walk, his head low and easy now, a stable boy on either side of him the way Wren had said. The boxes were settling. The band, after a stunned silence, took up a softer air than before. And Tomas Wren stood as square. That is the part I most want you to understand, and it is the part the songs cannot help but get wrong, because a song wants a man to be carried off the field on shoulders. He was not carried off. He squared his bearskin, and he took back his rifle, and he stood the rest of his watch in the green and gold light exactly as he had stood the start of it, eyes forward, white gloves still, giving the bright perfumed crowd nothing, except that now, when they looked at him, every face that looked carried something it had not carried that morning. They did not see a fence post anymore. They saw the still place at the center of the field, the place the running had stopped, and they were a little afraid of him in the way men are rightly afraid of a thing that turned out to be far larger than they had judged it. The thin stable boy with the water bucket, the one Wren had silenced at the rail with half a shake of his head, came past our post near the end of the day. He had known all along. He had recognized the quietman the moment he saw him stand, because the boy's own father had been gentled out of a bad start by Wren at the remount, and had told the boy the story 100 times, and the boy had been bursting all morning to tell the laughing lords exactly who they were mocking. Wren had stopped him. I asked Wren later, why? Because then it would have been about the name, he said. Toy soldier or quietman, it's all the same to the standing. You stand because it's right to stand, not because of what they'll find out you are. He paused. And the boy would have made enemies of his betters defending a man who didn't need defending. I'd not have him pay for my peace. The remount reopened within the year. I have it on good word that Lord Verrill was as good as his desperate promise, that his house and 3 others endowed it, and that 2 of the men who teach there now learned the way of it under Tomas Wren in the old days, and that over the door, by the request of every master who put his name to the founding charter, there is no name at all. There is a single line cut into the stone lintel, and it reads, "A frightened thing only needs somewhere to put the fear down." Wren did not go back. He never went back. He stood his post on our gate for another 2 years until his knees gave out the way an old guardsman's knees do, and then he took a small cottage near the estate with a paddock behind it, and the houses that had once turned him out now send him, very quietly, the 1 horse a year that no one else can save, and he saves it, and he asks nothing, and he keeps no name over his door either. I went to see him last spring. He was older and slower, and his hands had the tremor old hands get, and there was a leggy bad-tempered colt in his paddock that had already put 2 professional trainers in the dirt, and Tomas Wren was standing in the middle of that paddock making that low even sound under his chest, turned a little away, shoulders soft, hands low, and the colt was coming round him in a slow, uneasy circle, ears flicking forward a half-inch more on every pass. I stood at the rail and I did not say anything, because you do not break that. I only watched the circle get smaller, the way I had watched it get smaller on the green at the midsummer carousel all those years before, and I thought about the man in the silver coat who had said, loud enough for the whole field to hear, that this man could not sit a horse to save his life. He could not, perhaps. I never did see Tomas Wren ride. In all my years beside him I never once saw him in a saddle, and I have come to believe he did not much care for it, that sitting astride a thing to master it was not his way at all. His way was to stand on the ground in front of the frightened animal and be the place the fear could stop. The colt came in at last and dropped its head and leaned the bone of its skull against the old man's shoulder, trembling, and let itself be held, and Tomas Wren rubbed the place between its eyes with two shaking fingers, and murmured something I was too far to hear. The same as the gray. The same as 20 years of horses no one else could touch. He never sat a horse to save his life. He just stood in front of them and saved theirs. And I have come to think that is the larger gift and the rarer one, and that the field full of men who could ride better than any of us was a field full of men who never once learned the thing the toy soldier knew, that the bravest place to stand is not in the saddle, where you are above the fear and master of it, but on the ground in front of it, where you are level with the frightened thing and you give it, with your own quiet body, somewhere to lay its head down. That is what I was guarding all those years and never knew. Not a fence post, not a statue. The man the wildest horse obeyed, standing his square in the green and gold light, giving the world nothing and being the still center it could turn around when the running came.